Hello everybody, here we are today doing 4 pros and cons of the Four Nations Face-Off tournament. But before we get started with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So kicking it off with the pros, I think attention was certainly a great one here. The All-Star game prior to this was not really doing very well. This is something that's not just unique to hockey. You deal with All-Stars not wanting to get hurt and it not being very serious or taken seriously. So I think that the league really wanted something unique and different to get those numbers up during a break for the players, and this really did that. And I think that I saw that absolutely with my own numbers. I didn't put out a video for 6 days, which isn't normal for me because I usually put out, at least 5 a week or close to it. And during that time where I was gone for Valentine's Day and my wedding anniversary, I actually had better numbers than what I normally do because the video that I did a couple of years ago, Hockey for Beginners, that gets a decent amount of views every month, actually just kind of popped off yet again. And I was like, man, if I had put out normal videos too during this time, my monthly views really would be above average. So that was something that was cool to see, with me and seeing my numbers, but also too, I saw that this was the most watched non-Stanley Cup final game, I believe, in ESPN history. I had like 10 million viewers, something like that. And this was just a great opportunity to bring in potential new fans and say, this is what hockey is. This is unique. And I think that we were able to see all of that online. Now, one of the cons, I think, unfortunately, is attention. There are a lot of politics at play right now. You have U.S. and Canadian relations that are just not in a good spot compared to what they traditionally are. And I think some people really just are riding off of the U.S.'s coattails. And in that first Canada-U.S. game, people that had never watched hockey a day in their life end up making these TikToks or whatever, chanting USA, USA, or it was just people that that are really popular online that have never talked about hockey that miraculously end up talking about it. To me, it was just kind of annoying. I mean, I just don't understand. You are using this for whatever reason, I don't know, but it just was unfortunate because it's like that these people are never going to tune into a game again. Or if they are going to tune into a game, it's probably just going to be the US and Canada. They weren't watching Finland and Sweden, which is, again, another great rivalry. But who knows, maybe over across the Atlantic, you've got Sweden and Finland, their politicians kind of doing something there. I really couldn't tell you. But for that, I think there's just a lot of people that just made it more annoying where it's like, oh man, like it's great to have new faces here, but you're here and I don't want you to be here. Please go away or actually enjoy the game for what it is instead of making it, political. But again, I digress. It's hockey, it's sports, it's the media, it's everything. It's bound to happen, but I'm just grateful overall that we did get so many new faces kind of brought into the sport. Now for another pro, we had the intensity. This was amazing. This was so much better than I thought it was going to be. And this was a breath of fresh air compared to what we saw with Nikita Kucherov and all of those guys during the All-Star break. These guys, I think, wanted to play, but also they wanted a break, and that's where it's hard. Whereas with international play, when you put that jersey on, you're representing your country. And I think that is a really big deal. And it allowed for maybe more physicality than I really expected. You have that clip of McDavid and Dahlin, and that was something that I think really did kickstart the tournament where people were like, oh, this is serious. This is not something where these teams are just taking it for granted and they're just going to go out there and it's going to be like an 8-7 game, like an all-star period, and things are going to be like that. No, it's going to be representing your country, playing high intensity to try to go out there and win the tournament for your nation. And I just think we got to see some really, really good hockey in that regard, some very passionate hockey. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that's really nice about this is because you have a lot of these guys that see each other frequently. Again, there's probably a little bit of a rivalry, but there is that sense of just trying to go out there and one up everybody else because you want to be able to say that you are the best, not only for your team, your country, but for yourself as well too, to say, yeah, I was able to outwork somebody else and we were able to win. Now, as for con injuries, this is kind of weird because even a few years ago, but I think especially when I was a kid, when the NHL didn't allow players into the Olympics, I think that I was always just complaining 24/7, talking about let them play, let them play, let them play. But then as I get a little bit older and you see and understand just, I think, more of the impact with injuries, you get more frustrated by international play. McAvoy, Kreider are a couple examples of guys that are injured that could miss a little bit of time with their teams. I don't think Kreider's situation will be as bad, considering it seems like the Rangers want to trade him. But in general, though, I think it's just a concern of what if something massive happens, especially with a big marquee NHL player. What then? Because then it turns into the NHL being like, well, you guys wanted to do this, and we kind of promoted it for you, and we allowed you back in international play and whatnot, and this is what happens. And I think that for NHL fans, we really just have to understand there is a serious risk to your players for your team, and that is something that is just absolutely terrifying, because if they get injured, let's say that, forbid this happening, but if they go out there and they tear their ACL or something like that in an international game, now, especially with this being kind of close-ish to the playoffs, you're out of maybe your best player being out for the playoffs. And I think that's one of the things that we were able to avoid to a really good extent for this tournament. But it is just terrifying knowing that we could see a tournament where maybe multiple big injuries happen, and then we say, wow, the playoffs are greatly impacted, and that's where we start to talk about, well, when it's all said and done, did the best team win, or were they just helped out by a tournament in February that ended up kind of, derailing things? Now, a third pro, I think, here is the rivalries, and this was something that we got to see within the nations. Obviously, I think this was something that was really cool to see. You have Canada, US, Finland, Sweden, historic rivalries right there. But I think as well, too, it really did set ourselves up pretty well for what we saw with, again, NHL play, because this isn't related solely to the tournament, but looking at the final game between Canada and the US. Connor McDavid scores a goal against Connor Hellebuyck. Two Connors battling it out. And what did I say in my video yesterday? I said that I was really looking forward to seeing the Edmonton Oilers and the Winnipeg Jets go out there and play in the Western Conference Final. That was while the intermission was going on between third period and overtime. And I think it's funny now because it really does set up that stage for future rivalries, possibly, because then you'll say, we lost to them in this tournament and it meant more than I thought it would originally, or it might just mean more to them than even we know. But then they say, oh, we can get them back come playoff time. So there was the international aspect, absolutely, which is what it's all about, and for bragging rights, and I think that was so unique. But I really do think a big pro that comes out of this probably is just the repetition and just getting to understand that the payback could come during the playoffs, which ultimately is the biggest deal. I know people say that it's a massive deal to represent your country, because that's absolutely true, but it's still about the Stanley Cup. So seeing how this kind of transpires come playoff time, I think will be really interesting, as well as the next tournament. Very exciting stuff. And again, the rivalries that'll come out of this, I think, are going to be really unique. I think it would actually be kind of ironic, though, if it was two players on the same team, 4 different countries, where if like a rift started, that would be a great YouTube video. Hoping that doesn't happen, because again, I want everybody to get along, but we'll see. Now, a con was the break between NHL games. Listen, I understand that these guys are human beings. They want to spend time with their families. Absolutely, I get that. But I do think that it was just very odd to be a fan, and from like February 10th to today, they haven't played any NHL games. This was a longer break than the All-Star break, and it was something that made me miss the regular season just so bad. And I think kind of the bad thing here with that is there's an understanding that probably more nations deserve to be in the tournament, and if you do that, then you have more games, which means a longer break. I don't know if that'll necessarily happen, because again, these are kind of the top 4 in the world for hockey, but again, it's just going to take some getting used to be away from the NHL for that long. And ultimately, I've said it before, I do enjoy international play. I do enjoy a lot of those aspects, but at the same time too, my love for the game is tied directly to the NHL, So being away from the NHL for that long, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't particularly enjoy that. I know that there's not really too much of a way to shorten the break. I still want these guys to be able to have a break to spend time with their families. I honestly, I guess in a way, wish they could have maybe another break as well too. It's a little bit longer than the Christmas break. But still, just being away from the game for like 2 weeks was really unfortunate, and I think it's just got us all itching back for more hockey. And I know, again, very enjoyable time, but I miss seeing the Canucks play. I miss just seeing NHL games in general, and it's weird when you only have one game a night and you're like, man, I want this to be back. And I don't know. I don't really think there's a way to fix that. So I think for a lot of us, we're just going to have to suck it up during the tournament and say, we're getting to watch hockey, international play with some of the best players in the world. We're just going to have to deal with the fact that we haven't got to watch our team play in 2 weeks, but it still hurts. The final pro was, this was just so fun. I have already said at the beginning of the video, I didn't necessarily have super high hopes for this tournament. I didn't know how it would do in terms of views, but I also didn't know how it would do in terms of just the intensity. This tournament, I think, was just a shot in the arm the NHL needed. I'm not going to go out there and say that this is going to, again, have long-term effects for 10, 20 years. Probably couldn't even have an effect into next year. But I do think that this really was just something to revitalize the league short term and just kind of give you that, you took a drink of coffee and say, oh, I'm up now. And I just can't imagine that we were able to watch what we watched last year and say we get to watch a total transformation in the span of a year. This was something that I just can't really wait for going into next year. And it's weird because, again, I'm very conflicted in this regard. But overall, I think everybody did have fun. Probably some heartbreak along the way, especially for teams like Finland. But this was something where everybody kind of got to win in a way for these teams and for NHL fans. Everybody just tuning in, getting to watch the teams play. If you lost, again, like the U.S., probably heartbreaking to lose in that fashion. But overall, I think that's kind of one of the good things. If you lose, it's not like losing in the playoffs for your team. But if you win, it is more of the bragging rights and saying, yeah, we were able to claim to be number one. Just fun all around. And then finally, the last con that we'll go with here is lack of other countries. I already highlighted that earlier, how it was just a little bit weird to only see these four. There are other really good nations. And I'm not necessarily concerned so much about the nations. I think that if you stretch it out to 6, you're probably going to include somebody like Czechia. Again, there is the awkward situation with Russia. We brought it up before. And I'll say it again. With the war in Ukraine, absolutely do not allow them in international play. But eventually they'll probably come back. But in the meantime, I don't know if they would expand the tournament and not include them, because then eventually down the line, hopefully that war does come to an end, because it will come to an end, because it has to. But then you wonder when they would kind of get brought back in and who they would bring in if that was the case, or if they would really just ostracize them. But I think it's more about there are other players on other teams or just representing other countries that didn't get to play in the tournament that you're hoping that would have. And this is just one of those deals where we have so many players from Europe and whatnot, where it is unfortunate, because you would like to see them go out there and play. So I would like them to expand, but I will ultimately say that there are a lot of hard questions to ask in that regard. Again, especially considering a nation like Russia, where, again, right now they don't deserve to be. But at the same time, too, people will get mad about that, but you have to understand the players are the players, and they come from that nation. That doesn't mean that they stand for what their government stands for. That doesn't mean that they are, bad people by any means at all. It just means that they happen to come from that country, which is banned from international play. And you have to have some of that empathy to understand that, again, this is something that isn't their fault. And I don't know. I think it's just one of those deals where in the coming years, they may keep it to 4 just because it's kind of a hard press. But in general, I think just being able to see more and more players from other countries, where, again, this is a global sport, would be nice to see. And again, a country like Czechia, where they've had a lot of success with World Juniors, it'd be really fun to see what could happen there. Again, like countries like Switzerland, where they have some players as well too. Germany's got some players. I do kind of worry about what the fall off would be with some of those countries in terms of depth, but I guess we'll see. But anyway, yeah, those are just 4 pros and cons of the Four Nations Face-Off tournament. Overall, it sounds like I'm kind of being a negative Nelly as I started to rant as I'm up at like 4 something in the morning. I'm a little tired because I fell asleep early to record this, and maybe I'm not making a lot of sense, but I will say that I did enjoy this. And for all the cons with injuries and some of those things, I think this was still worth it. And I think we should do it again. And I think that for a lot of people, this was something that either got them into the sport or really just kept them entertained without NHL games. And I hope everybody loved it. But leave your thoughts down below in the comments about what you thought of the tournament. And also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And Eagle of Hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.